Good afternoon and welcome to today's Festival of Debate live stream and our final event of the festival series. My name is Johnny and I'll be your host for today's live stream. On the call, we also have our panelists and our hosts for today's session and my colleague Natalie, who will be supporting the event by answering any of your queries and posting useful links in the chat. This afternoon's event is part of the 2021 Festival of Debate, an annual programme coordinated by the For Impact social enterprise Opus Independence, which brings people together to share new ideas that can help shape our understanding of the world. This year's programme is Pay What You Feel to ensure all of our online events are free at the point of access, but we do rely on donations from the audience to help make this happen. So if you are able to, please do go to the festivaldebate.com website to donate or click on the link in the chat if you are in a position to help support the work that we are doing. The festival team will be monitoring the chat this afternoon. We'd like to ask that all audience members are respectful of others and will remove anyone from our events that does not follow our Safer Festival policy, which is available on the website and in the chat. If you would like to ask any questions this afternoon, please do use the Q&A function, which you should find a button for somewhere on your device, whether that's a laptop, tablet or phone. This will allow us to clearly see the questions that you want to put to the panelists, which we'll get towards the latter half of this afternoon's live stream. You'll also find on there a chat function, which allows people on the call, on the webinar, to talk to each other. So if you do have any general comments to make, please do use the chat function alongside the Q&A. We will of course be broadcasting on our social media channels this afternoon on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. So you can tweet us directly at Fest of Debate. Again, links in the chat. And if you do have your social media to hand and you would like to share any of those live streams to amplify the discussion that's happening today, then please feel free to do so. Without further ado, I will otherwise be in the background, just checking that everything's working. I'll get the live captioning going shortly, but I'll hand over to your hosts for today, Tallulah and Isaac.
Hello, thanks for all joining us on this gorgeous day and sitting inside with us for 2 hours. I'll just quickly tell you who we've got with us today. We've got Ayana, who is the creator of Anti-Speciest Art Collective, and they also host a podcast called We Speak of Freedom. And we also have with us Max Watson, an ex-animal liberation activist. And these are very brief intros because of course you'll hear a lot more of their opinions. We've got Catherine Parsons, who is a freelance journalist and a nutritionist. We've got Flowerbomb, who's an anarchist writer and the founder of Warzone Distro. And we've got Dom W, who's an anarchist activist who's been involved with a lot of environmental campaigns. So I'll let Isaac.
Okay, cool. Again, thank you very much for joining us on such a beautiful day. My name is Isaac Hughes-Dennis. This is Tallulah Howarth. We'll be the co-hosts of the final debate for this festival. It's an absolute honour. We're going to do first is we're going to go around and hear from each of our panelists individually with the opening question. What's your definition or personal understanding of veganism, and how do you politically identify? We're going to start with Ayana for that one, please. Oh, Ayana, you're muted.
Hi, thank you for telling me that. So I was thinking about this question and I kind of wrote down a sort of definition, but I'll go into more detail as well. I said, real veganism is being an active non-participant in the ideological supremacy of humanness, the interpersonal violence of ownership-based human-animal relationships, and the systemic, institutional, and deliberate colonization, degradation, and exploitation of non-human animals. Veganism is the constant act of being anti-speciesist and pro-animality. Being vegan is not a question of individual purity, but a bravery to relinquish and redistribute the power, access, and privilege we hold despite societies that rely on imbalance. But I think veganism is a work in progress. I think that it's not a goal. It's not something that you can definitively reach, something that is constant. And to answer the second question, how do I politically identify? I I don't really identify politically. I think I take lots of different thoughts and ideologies and points from many different people, many different movements, and many different schools of thought. And I wouldn't say that I lean a particular way, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Cheers. Flower Bomb, your political understanding and your take on what veganism means to you.
Well, I guess to keep it short, I would say that my understanding of veganism is a individual personal rejection of the authoritarian model of human supremacy and its attempt to disconnect us from wild nature. And I think that anthropocentrism or human supremacy is something that like keeps every other form of oppression working and in motion, and it is one of the most important gears of capitalism. And I think that also identifying as an anarchist myself against authority, against governance and things like that, I think that being vegan is one of the most like foundational basic things that an individual who rebels and who insist on taking their life back from, you know, this system, colonial establishments, authority, and so on and so forth. I feel like going vegan is the most essential part because it is an expression of rejection that anybody is merely an object to consume.
Thank you ever so much. Max Watson, we saw you nodding your head in agreement there. Is that in line with your political and personal understandings of veganism?
I really liked what's been said so far by everyone. I agree with all of those ideas, and for me, I've been 50 at the start of this year, so for me, it's really inspiring and moving to see that people in animal rights, people are talking about animal rights still, or there's kind of maybe even a newer thing that's going on with it. I love the fact that people are talking about this, I really do. For me, veganism is really just my personal dietary choice to reject all of that stuff. And I've been vegan for 33 years. I don't see anything that's not vegan that comes from an animal anyway. I don't see that as food. I really don't. You know, it's become something different from food in my mind. And I do like the spiritual aspect of being vegan as well. For me, there's a strong spiritual element that every day, you know, I'm rejecting a direct consumption of something that comes from such huge, awful suffering. So it's really a personal decision for me, and I think it's the first stage, hopefully, in people becoming activists. It should be the initial step. I'm rejecting animal abuse and animal products in my diet. Now I'm going to try and stop that abuse happening.
Sure, thank you. We're going to come to Dom W next. Again, the same question to you, please.
What I think about veganism, I mostly my video is muted.
Can we find a way of getting Dom's? There we are. Cool.
Okay.
We're back.
Yeah, I'm mostly vegan, but as well vegan, as I'm mostly living in occupations and protest camps. So if I go skipping, what means to go to the bins of supermarkets, and I feed myself mostly out of them. Sometimes there are unavailable products inside. So I don't mind eating those if I don't have any other options rather than buying loads of vegan food. But as well, I'm involved normally in like animal liberation, environmental protests, occupations, and campaigns. But through my money availability, it's not, I'm and loads of other people are not able to be completely vegan, but never buying it.
How do you politically identify, Dom?
I identify as an anarchist. Yeah.
Cool. And then finally, we'll go to Catherine. The same question to you. How do you politically identify, and what's your definition of veganism?
I'd say my personal understanding of veganism is just like the abstaining of animal products in someone's life. And I suppose if we agree that perfect veganism can't exist in the world that we are in currently, then I suppose for everybody else, it's just about doing the least amount of harm that they are able to do. And then I suppose politically identify, I'm probably unlike most of the I'm quite like Tory in the UK, which gets quite a lot of people's backs up when they are vegan, which I don't necessarily think is justified, because I don't necessarily see my personal choices having to always intertwine with my political choice, because we don't have a society that necessarily supports, there's no party that directly aligns with my vegan views. So sometimes in the kind of demographic or representation that we allow in the UK, I can't necessarily use my voice to vote effectively as vegan, if that makes sense. Like where my seat is, you kind of end up being Tory. So that's how I would politically identify. But yeah, so I kind of separate it to my veganism, I would say.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. We'll move on to the next question, Tol.
Okay, so the next thing that we wanted to discuss was just the perception of veganism in the mainstream eye, and how you think the veganism is currently viewed, how you feel about that. So I think we'll go to Ayana first on that one.
My video's been turned off and it's not working. Thank you. Thanks. I think that mainstream non-vegan people see mainstream veganism, and mainstream veganism is white veganism, is capitalistic veganism, it's food consumption based, it's oppressive, basically. So in some ways, I think the way that wider society views veganism is kind of accurate. It's just a shame that that veganism that isn't really veganism, in my way of thinking, is the one that gets the attention, or is the kind that gets the attention.
Sure. Catherine, does that sort of align with the way that you think veganism is perceived in the mainstream eye?
I'd say, mainstream media forms exist because they are a spectacle. Like they have to sell, so they need to sell usually things that are, kind of either popular rhetoric or not extreme rhetoric, but something that will be sold. And things that sell are, like Anna was saying, food, like these big companies then offer, new vegan things. So that's what the advertising is, or what the perception of veganism in the mainstream will be, extreme veganism that gets a negative perception from the rest of the public. And then it can then be used as a form of kind of disdain for the movement or criticism of the movement, because they'll pick up the things that they think people aren't necessarily going to like if it's an anti-vegan news outlet. But the other side, the point about capitalism is that, we do live in a capitalist society, and regardless of your kind of pros or cons against it, it still probably gets more people to go vegan. And so it still gets people buying vegan food. And so if your ultimate goal is about, you can have 100 perfect vegans, or you can have 1,000 imperfect vegans. So if you've got more people buying vegan food, is that better, even though it's within a capitalist ideology? And the other thing I will just say is that the other problem is, because lots of the mainstream media pushes out these new advertising for like unhealthy food, it's still then really bad for us anyway, if that makes sense. Like ultra processed vegan food is still horrific for our insides, even though it's, not animals. So then it's just this idea of that you're not necessarily putting the person first, it's still just trying to sell us things. So it's very difficult, unfortunately.
We'll go to Flowerbomb. Do you agree with Catherine that capitalism maybe has a place in creating more vegans? And if that is the case, do you think that's a positive aspect of a system?
I think it's very complicated. I think it's very complex where I'm from. A big part of why I started writing is because there's actually a lot of different like movements or communities or tendencies with veganism. There really isn't a mainstream anymore, because mainstream could literally mean, for example, the fact that there's a lot of like Black owned businesses that are becoming vegan and that are promoting veganism from a specifically capitalist perspective. And then you still have, you know, the mainstream veganism, which is just like, you know, the expensive foods you find in like Whole Foods or something. But because there's so many different varieties of like veganism and tendencies in different groups of people, it's really hard to see which one is main. But I guess if we're talking specifically about a capitalist veganism, I feel like it's kind of, like I said, it's kind of complex. Because again, you see a lot of like POC vegan establishments that are opening up. Veganism is becoming more popular in places where it wasn't before. Yeah, it's a little complicated. It's kind of a thing everywhere now. It just depends on who we're talking about specifically and what demographic.
Max Watson, yeah, the popularization of veganism through capitalism and its perception by the mainstream. Any thoughts?
Oh, well, the first thing is I didn't really answer how I politically identified. So I am an old school hardcore anarchist. And yeah, well, I'm an animal liberationist. So I have the perspective that the vegan thing, the vegan movement, the internet vegan movement, even, you know, because it's nearly all seems to be internet related. I feel like that's kind of become something bigger in itself than the animal suffering. And I think the focus needs to be shifted back to the animal abuse, back to the animal abusers. We need to intervene. And I think the good thing about this vegan thing is it means there's loads of potential activists. There's a huge potential pool of people that disrupt the animal industries. That's what I think is positive about veganism at the minute. In terms of people becoming vegan for a while and then leaving it, we've currently researched and show that's the case. In terms of animal abuse industries being impacted by people being vegan. A lot of these vegan products are made by animal abusers as well, you know. So vegan thing for me is kind of something that shouldn't be above the animal liberation and the animal abuse. We need to rebalance that. We need to drag the new vegans into activism. That's the good part.
There's a very famous text by a guy called Brian A. Dominic called On Social Revolution and Animal Liberation, and I'm sure we'll refer to it at various points across the evening. But the overall synopsis of the text was that he argued that full animal liberation can't exist aside from the fall of capitalism and with social revolution. Do you think that's the case, Max?
Absolutely, yeah. And really pretty much every ALF activist I've known is the same. And you know, and Barry Horn, he did loads of similar statements as that. So yeah, definitely. Capitalism is the enemy. There's always going to be people abusing animals the same way there's always going to be people abusing each other. That's kind of part of humanity, but we can reduce that abuse. by having a fairer society. You know, and we can't do any of these things while people in power are making so much money from abusing each other, making weapons, whatever they're doing, all this capitalist stuff. It's all interlinked. Yeah, so we need a total uprising and a total new society to even dream of animal liberation. Yeah.
Flower Bomb, will come over to you on that one.
Actually, very much agree with what Max was just saying. One of my biggest concerns related to capitalism and veganism right now is that if you rewind about 10 years and you look at what veganism was back then, because veganism wasn't as popular back then, it kind of had teeth. It was kind of a radical kind of like, you know, it was like a form of resistance that capitalism wasn't necessarily prepared for. And so even though you had like people holding signs and a lot of the liberal tactics that back then, it was still impactful, because capitalism saw that there was people upset and that there was people upset enough to get into the streets and do stuff. One of my biggest concerns right now is that because veganism is becoming so popular, you see all these different companies like Ben and Jerry's, you see a lot of the enemy companies becoming vegan or becoming more pro-vegan. And I'm really concerned that ultimately capitalism is going to take the teeth out of veganism, and it will become normal the same way that wage slavery is normal, or, you know, police and prisons becoming normal. And I think that's why it's very important for people, especially like myself as a vegan, to always advocate like, okay, yeah, like liberation of animals, but we are also animals as well. And we are still enslaved to all these different forms of governance, you know. And I just want to reiterate that I think that's a very important aspect of being vegan, is recognizing all other forms of authority as well. Like, it has to be a total uprising.
Catherine, I'd be really interested to get your take on this. The veganism
I'm just
has
going to end
be...
up being devil's advocate on this whole thing. I feel,
Go for it.
Just so it's a bit debate for people. So the first thing I say is the question to you guys. Obviously, if you're asking about a full uprising and against capitalism and current society, given I'm talking for the UK, do you actually think that's realistic, that we're going to be able to overthrow a capitalist society currently? And given that kind of historically attempts in Western Europe have failed, and their alternative and the opposite of capitalism, that's not really been successful. And so I've just seen the question. When I'm not talking for the UK, I'm talking about the UK's political structure, just for the clarity on that. So yeah, do you think it's actually a realistic goal? Is basically my question to kind of you guys.
So Dom, you've been living in the UK for about 4 years after moving from Germany, so you've seen more than one sort of political system. What do you think about this?
On mute, Dom.
I think it's a long process from going over throwing capitalism, and it's a long step. I'm not too sure if this is reachable in some point, maybe in the future, but currently we have to live how we're living. And so like veganism, if like companies like Richmond or the big meat sellers are now just stepping onto like selling vegan products, I'm not too sure if it's better to buy of those companies, or for like my point, just go into bins and like dig food out of there. And like vegan food is still really expensive as well, so it needs to be made more affordable for the wider population. And yeah, if you're trying to live more in an anarchist, non-capitalist way, I believe yeah, it is quite hard to overthrow the society, but it might be possible in some point.
We're going to go to Max, then Ayana, and then I think we might have to wrap it up there and move on to our next topic. So Max Watson first, please.
What I want to say just about a point Catherine raised there, which was, is it realistic, you know, that we can do such and such? And to be honest, that is kind of fundamental to being an activist or a good activist, and that is believing in the unbelievable, you know. If everyone thought, oh, if I start a campaign against Huntingdon Life Sciences, I'm going to lose their biggest lab in the world, you know, we can never win against them. But look what happened with them. They would have closed, you know, and over the decades, I've seen so many animal abusers close down, so many hunts stabbed, so many companies pulling out of investing in animal abuse, pressure campaigns. So it's all about believing. And I think step by step, yeah, if we can Covance Huntingdon Life Sciences out of the UK, if we can stop vivisection investment in the UK, and then people stop investing in animal abuse in the UK, and then people start realizing that animal abuse is getting chased out of the UK and that it's part of a struggle against capitalism as a whole, then yeah, maybe step by step, who knows? But the vital part of wanting any change, positive change, really believing in the impossible. So it is very easy to say, yeah, we need to overthrow the system. That's very easy. You need to have tactics and strategies of how piece by piece you're going to dismantle it, in my opinion. And the most important thing is that you believe in the impossible. That is fundamental to being a determined activist. You know, the most successful activists have been the people that have thought, I could get arrested tonight, but 2 years later they're still active. And you've got to always believe in success. Without that vision, you're never going to change anything.
Thank you. Ayana, and then we have to move on, please. Cheers.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that capitalism is such a violent system that it makes us believe in it rather than the people. I think I've had so many conversations with people who really like listen to what I'm saying and they're like, oh yeah, that's cool, but it's never going to happen. Oh, it's just the way it is. And I think that's so sad because we do have so much potential. We have to believe in our potential. We can't be pessimistic. Otherwise, we're never going to get what we want. And if you say that, is it possible? If you start questioning that, if you start getting complicit in oppression, then yeah, there's no point. It's like you're giving up on yourself and giving up on animals that you may be advocating for, on many marginalized humans. And I think it's also a really privileged thing to say, because if you can be comfortable in this world and not have the drive and the passion to want to have liberation, that means you're clearly benefiting from the way that the world is. Yeah, so I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. Cheers. So sort of continuing this conversation on, but in from a slightly different tangent, the next written question we've got is whether or not it's morally justifiable to break the law in the name of animal liberation. I think we're going to go to Max Watson first, because obviously you've spent time in prison in the name of animal liberation. I just wanted to understand your justification for doing so and whether you regret any of that.
Absolutely not, and no regrets, absolutely never. And very, very few, nearly all of my closest friends have all been ex-ALF activists and done time. Two of my best friends, Keith Mann and Barry Horn, got the 2 longest ever UK sentences to 14 years and 18 years. Quite a lot of people I know have received 10 years. Over 200 people in the UK have gone to prison in the name of animal liberation. So it's a big thing. And I was just playing my part in the movement, you know. So for me, it's not about justifying breaking the law or breaking the law per se. It's about what works, you know, because we need the anger and the urgency to liberate those animals, and what is going to achieve that. And it just so happens a lot of the stuff that is the most effective happens to be illegal. And I guess that's kind of why it's illegal, because they don't want you to be effective and affect change or whatever. So the fact it's illegal is irrelevant. Is it effective or not? And yes, Keith Mann, who got 14 years for ALF activities, as the leader with the ALF in the 90s, he's written a 600+ page book, From Dusk Till Dawn, which I'm doing a DIY video series on my channel for, Animal Liberation TV. And in that, it documents sort of 40, 50 years of the history of the Animal Liberation Front. And I think if people really knew the extent and effectiveness of direct action for animal liberation, they'd be astounded at the effect. You know, hundreds of millions of pounds being caused in economic damage. Tons of animal abuse has been closed down. So there's no doubt that it's effective ALF action. And to be honest, speaking from the ALF perspective is that is animal liberation. Pretty much all activities are just kind of the frills around the side, you know. So yeah, it's morally justifiable. It's not just morally justifiable, it's essential that people start becoming real activists and we start having some effect and stopping these people abusing animals, basically.
Dom, you're the only person on the panel who doesn't fully identify as a vegan. From your stance, do you still think that it's justifiable to break laws in the name of animal activism?
Yes, definitely. Like in the last few weeks, I've been part of organizing the last week's blockage of the 4 McDonald's distribution centers and planning and organizing it through previous arrests. I couldn't be on the land myself, but I were part of organizing the blockage of the distribution centers in the UK. And I do believe and fully support and sometimes take part in liberating chickens or liberating animals from farms to bring to sanctuaries, and been in the past as well involved in various animal liberation projects and been working on sanctuaries. For my mind and thinking, I am totally supportive of the vegan question, but practically for me, it's just not possible without having a bank account or money sometimes to live completely vegan. If you just have to steal or skip your food out of supermarket bins. So yeah.
Well, there's an argument that I think we'll touch upon later, that veganism can be defined by what is practically possible, as opposed to the full expulsion of animal products from one's lifestyle. And that's something that's again a contentious thing within lots of vegan circles, and so I'm sure we'll come back to that and we can explore that later. Until then, Ayana, you would like to come back to this legality point?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say, like, the systemic exploitation of animals is legal everywhere. So just logically, what does that mean? We have to break the law to be able to liberate animals, to be able to get animal liberation. It's not going to happen in a world that allows that. And obviously, like, as Max has said, it completely erases, I think, the history of the animal rights movement to even question that. But also just the word morally has been used as a weapon with Western European colonialism and like missionary colonialism, used the idea of purity and morality to basically animalize black and brown people and animalized and marginalized communities. So I think even the word moral is a bit weird. It's oppressive language in my mind.
Flower Bomb, we're going to come over to you next. Thank you for that, Anna. Oh, Flower Bomb, I think you're muted again.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I really agree, especially about, like, you know, what was just said about morality and about colonialism. I think those things are very, very important when we're talking about legality. personally, I identify as an illegalist anarchist. I believe that, similar to being vegan on a personal level, I believe that illegality is a way for an individual to understand how to survive without supporting the system financially. I don't have a bank account. I don't really have much money, but I've been living just different ways of being vegan and getting food. These supermarkets have tons of food, and yet there's people that are starving to death. And I think it's absolutely absurd. So the idea of stealing from these stores is very practical and very basic for me. As far as like illegality, as far as like property destruction or vandalism or ALF, ELF, I think all of those things are absolutely necessary, because if we're talking about, you know, other beings being oppressed, if I feel like laws keep people from really exploring that anger and exploring that sense of urgency to do something about it, to react and to respond. And I think that as long as we continue to respect and uphold laws, I feel like we continue to uphold the mental prisons that keep us subordinate, and therefore keep all of these really awful institutions going. So I totally support illegal forms of activism, especially related to animal liberation and veganism. Yeah.
And just asking you about some writings you've done in the past on morality. You write about nihilism and this thing of there not being a true morality, if you want to expand on that a bit.
Yeah, I would love to. So basically, if you look at how things are set up to keep the individual person subordinate to this system, you have things like religion, you have law and order, you have all of these forms of condition that attempt to keep us detached from our own emotional reactions that we might have to these awful situations. If you look at schools, if you look at kids who act out of line, they're immediately like, subordinated either through punishment verbally or through, psychiatric medications. Like everything about capitalism and, colonialism, industrial society is an attempt to subordinate the individual, but subordinate everybody. So when it comes to morality, these are things that have been constructed to make us believe in right or wrong. And you know that these cannot possibly be universal truths, because there's people out there that think it's perfectly okay to be a human supremacist, that it is our right because we are humans to consume, other animals. But then there's people like myself who absolutely disagree with that. So, morality is very subjective. It's an artificial construct, and it's specifically constructed to teach us the human supremacist colonial view of what's right or what's wrong.
Thank you for that. Ayana would like to come in on that point, please.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that you were saying just then. And your point about school really hit me. Because I recently left school and I'm homeschooled now. But school is just like a massive system of violence. And I don't think we as a society we don't recognize the amount of trauma that happens in school, because it's where we really start to be indoctrinated into the system. And it's this very like school to prison or school to labor pipeline. It's just so disgusting. And for example, one of the rules at my old school was that you weren't allowed to remove your blazer without the teacher's permission. Like you weren't even allowed to regulate your own body temperature. Like that's how controlling an environment it is. And it's based on so much carceral logic and carceral punishment, like even just detentions as the idea, that if you don't follow the rules, then your autonomy and your time is allowed to be taken away by the authority. Just want to touch on that.
Catherine, I'm aware that we haven't heard from you in a while, so we're going to come to you. I just wanted to bring up Max in his first statement, said that not only was it sort of justifiable to break the law, but in fact it was essential to veganism to break the law in the name of animal rights and animal liberation. Where do you stand on that?
In regards to the is it justifiable, like morally, moving away from the people's definitions of moral, if we take it in just like the general understanding, I think it's personal. So I think if you think it's justified, then that's fine. If you think that it's okay to, like, that law is worth breaking for your belief, then I think you can justify that to yourself. I think the difficulty is if you do get a criminal record, what that then means for the difficulties that causes in the society you are in, again, whether you agree or not, but it does cause a problem. And then the part about if it's necessary, again, I suppose that comes back to the reason someone is vegan. Like if they're vegan for their health, and if veganism is going to be a tolerant belief, you have to reckon you can't be intolerant to people's different reasons for being vegan. So if someone is vegan for their health, then they're not going to justify the breaking of the law for animal liberation, because that's not their focus. If they're vegan for the environment, they may just think that, no, actually, if I just kind of promote plant-based and don't eat animals, then I'm doing my bit for the environment. So no, I'm not going to go and, break trespass on a agricultural land. So yeah, I think it comes back to, if it's your personal view and you justify it, then that's fine. That's your opinion. But I don't necessarily think it's necessary, because it doesn't reflect everybody's views on why they're vegan, I suppose.
And I just remember from the question before about the mainstream perception of veganism, you used the word extreme. You said that extreme vegans might bring a negative light onto the movement. So what would you class as extreme veganism?
So I don't like the idea of extreme veganism, because I think it's used as a negative. So that was more the point I was trying to say, that the idea of extreme or radical for anything, which usually is just basically a vegan who is trying to get their message across and is automatically said they're pushy, or it's basically any vegan who wants to talk is usually labeled as radical. So what I was just saying is they'll talk about people breaking the law. They'll use that as a and they'll put that in a negative light as a anti-vegan sphere. That's what I was saying about, that's what kind of mass media platforms do to create spectacle. I wasn't necessarily saying I think there's nothing wrong with being again, I don't like this radical, but either way, I think they deliberately use these kind of extreme language.
Sure. And I think you're potentially right in saying that there is a minority of radical vegans. Do you think these militant veganism, for use of a better phrase, do you think militant veganism gives the majority of vegans a bad name or a bad press?
Well, things from militant vegan, as far as I'm aware, I don't really see much of the vegan movement taking military act. As far as I'm aware, I don't think many people are running around with guns, because that would be quite ironic if we're trying to claim about lack of harm and then we're going bang, 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 that. So, but I think it's about, I don't necessarily think other vegans take militant veganism as bad. I think it's people who aren't vegan and are against veganism, they will see it as bad. That's because usually, I'm a vegan. Do I think other people doing probably a lot more activism than I am? Great, the more the better, kind of thing. If I'm trying to convince my friend to try the vegan burger at the restaurant, if we're then, they're the people that are like anything, because they don't even want to try the vegan burger, they're the people who tend to be against extreme is vegan, I would say.
Brilliant, thank you. We're going to come to Ayana because I appreciate you've been waiting for a while. So Ayana, go for it.
No worries. I just wanted to, I'm not ignoring what you said just now, but I just wanted to pick up a word that you used before. You used the word belief to describe veganism. And I kind of just wanted to see what everybody else thinks. I don't see it as a belief because I feel like it makes it sound religious. But yeah, how does everyone else see veganism? Do you see it's like a practice, a theory, a belief maybe, or what?
I think we'll go back to Catherine for that because it was related to what she said, and then we'll go around the circle, and then we'll come back to Flower Bomb on their previous point, if that's okay. So we'll start with Catherine. Cheers.
I'm using belief to just describe an attitude about something that is, not a religious belief. I don't see veganism as religious in any capacity. I think it's more of just an approach to life. And people can, like any approach to life, people can do as much or as little in alignment with that than they choose, basically.
Thank you. We'll go to Dom. Veganism as a belief, or freeganism in your case as a belief. Is that a fair term to describe it?
Both of them. Like, I totally believe in veganism if it's achievable and practically workable. But for some people who, like me, or the other activists who can't physically afford vegan food, like in Germany rather than the UK, there's barely any vegan products still in the supermarkets, and the only place where you can buy vegan food would be Whole Foods. So I do believe, as a belief, yes, I do believe totally in veganism, that it can work, but yeah, practically it's not really for me all the time a point.
We'll go to Max and then Flower Bomb. You can answer the question and then bring your point, and then we'll go to Catherine, if that's all right.
What's the question on this moment again?
The question was one that Ayana raised in terms of how comfortable do you feel classing veganism as a belief of yours, and whether that term belief accurately describes your practice of veganism.
You know, like I've said, the vegan thing is just like my little thing. It's not about the vegan movement or about how many vegans there are or how many products. It's about when was the last animal abuser closed down? You know, when was the last pressure campaign? When was the last blockade or occupation? When was the last ALF action? You know, I'm not really so bothered about the vegan movement, to be honest, because it is a vegan consumer movement. I want to hear about oppressive institutions pulling out of investing, things like that, basically.
Well, thank you. We'll go Flower Bomb. If you could answer Ayana's question, and now I know you've had a point that you've been wanting to make for a while off the back of what Catherine originally said. So we'll go to you next.
Yeah, definitely. Is it a belief? I don't know. I think for communication purposes, I would probably not consider it a belief. I consider veganism an act of rebellion, a personal act of rebellion. It's an action, it's a practice. It's something that you engage with on a daily basis. It's something that you think about, you do. Yeah, I feel like it kind of boils down to semantics, just communication. If you want to tell people that you believe in veganism, I mean, that's fine. You might have to explain to somebody, like, it's not a belief like religion or anything. It's like these views. And then eventually you get to, like, okay, I practice veganism. So I think it just depends on the context of the conversation and who you're having it with. Let's see. Oh, yeah. So what I was going to say before is, what I've noticed in my experience is that you, it's like, it depends on who perceives you. usually, yeah, it's the anti-vegans or the non-vegans that will try to, you know, use the claim, oh, militant vegans, almost as if they're saying like, oh, vegans are oppressive. They're like pushing their beliefs on me, you know, and that's something that you hear a lot from like people that are trying to troll you or, you know, but I think that you can be a very passionate vegan. I think that you can, you know, be a quote extreme vegan and still have the time to engage in a discussion with somebody about what you believe veganism is. Tactically speaking, I have seen both different things work. I can't say that like holding signs is an inferior tactic because I've seen how leafleting and holding signs is a very passive but useful way of communicating veganism with people that might otherwise just have no idea what's going on. Equally, I have seen how more like intense forms of vegan activism like property destruction or animal liberation, I have seen how these things have also inspired people to become vegan because when you put that kind of action to it, some people are inspired by that because people see like, wow, like these people aren't just holding signs, like they're really pissed off. I want to see what they're pissed off about. So I was just going to say that, yeah, it kind of depends on who you're talking to and the context of the conversation. So that's all I was going to add to that.
Brilliant. We'll go back to Catherine. You had a raised hand, is that correct?
It's kind of all been covered. It's all good.
Okay, in that case, we'll move on to the next topic, which I wanted to come to Ayana for this one. Am I correct in thinking that you view all the different aspects of your identity and your activism as intersectional?
Recently I've been thinking about the word intersectional, and I'm trying to avoid using it because it was invented by Kimberly Crenshaw specifically to describe misogynoir, or the intersect between misogyny and racism for Black women and Black femmes. So I would re-describe it as like consistently anti-oppression.
So in that case, how do you think that your veganism or your activism can be total? I'm trying to avoid again using the word intersectional. In practical terms, how do you ensure that your veganism
is consistently anti-oppression?
There we go.
Well, veganism is inherently consistently anti-oppression. I also don't think there's such a thing as my veganism, because I feel like that gives room for interpretation. I think veganism is a specific thing. It's an active thing. It's against speciesism. And I think when we start to say, make it, like, I don't know, you wouldn't really say like my racism or my anti-transphobia. It seems weird to me. I don't know, to make it personal when it's just, it's like, it's what it is. But I have no choice to be consistently anti-oppression because I'm vegan, and because I am a Black person, because I'm a queer person, because I'm a neurodivergent person. I don't have the privilege to not be focusing on things that connect with and are parallel to the oppression of animals, because it is all connected. And I think there is a way that you can focus on a specific issue or a specific oppression whilst also being aware and inclusive in your understanding of how all the other ones connect to it.
I'd just like to, we'll come to you in 2 seconds, Catherine. I'd just like to raise that thing that you said there, Ayana, in terms of veganism is one thing, and it's against speciesism. And so for you, does that make people who, and I think the reason that the question was branded so personally as your veganism, is there are a lot of strands of people who brand themselves with veganism. And so for you, do you think people who are veganism for health, vegan rather for health, veganism in terms of environmental activism, vegan just for a dietary requirement, does that make them any less vegan? Does that take away that term? Is that term relevant for people who practice plant-based living for reasons separate to speciesism?
You could go reason for whatever reason, but in my mind, being vegan is being consistently anti-oppression. So you can go vegan for your health, because health and speciesism and the environment and all of those issues are very much intertwined, and it's good to be aware of all of those things. But yeah, veganism is, to me, being consistently anti-oppression. It's being anti-domination, anti-ownership of like each other. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, really.
Absolutely, absolutely it does, yeah. And so on that note, we're going to go to Catherine, who's had her hand up.
You actually asked my question, Isaac. It was going to be about if veganism isn't personal, and then therefore does that mean then people aren't, as vegan as they're supposed to be? Which I think I know you just said you didn't necessarily, they are still vegan, but obviously I do think there's a danger in assuming that everyone is vegan for the same reason. And if there are vegans whose primary focus or even secondary focus is not the animals, and I think they are still vegan, and they are still can identify vegan and preach veganism for whatever reason they deem appropriate, because that is their personal veganism. So yeah, it was kind of the same question, basically, was my point.
Ayana, this
yeah, I just wanted to reply. I just wanted to think. They wanted to think. Oh no, I forgot what I was going to say. What did you just say? Sorry.
It was the same. It was the same thing. It was about that you said that you don't necessarily think veganism can be personal, and you think you believe that veganism is inherently anti-oppressive.
Well, I think. Yeah. Okay. I don't think I have anything to add. Sorry.
No worries. In that case, I did want to bring up a point with some of the writings that you've done, Flowerbomb. You're quite against identity politics, it seems. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I predominantly I appreciate the analysis that identity politics or identity provides us with understanding how oppression works, but I feel like it's limited because not everybody fits into these very narrowly confined boxes that society assigns us at birth. And so therefore, I feel like, especially in my own personal experience, having met so many different people, there's people that just don't fit into each of these categories. And therefore, I don't feel that identity politics is a reliable source of liberation. I feel like it could be a helpful tool in understanding how things are right now. But I feel like liberation would have to come from an individual recognizing that these socially constructed categories do exactly what they're intended to keep us performing and acting as if we are locked within these boxes. And it's something that I've always been critical of. For example, speaking of intersectionality and veganism, a lot of my experience is that a lot of people, assume that veganism is a white thing, is a white upper class thing. What you don't hear a lot about is that there's a lot of people of color within poverty who have been surviving on a predominantly plant-based diet for years. They might not identify as vegan, but as a matter of fact, like where I come from, like beans and rice, like a lot of this stuff is very easy to make. It's very accessible and it's cheap. But you never really hear these perspectives because they don't really exist in like academia. And I feel like this is where identity kind of gets blurred. And the experience that I've had a lot with identity is that people tend to make assumptions about individuals based on these identity categories that society has assigned to us. And so personally, I don't like to make assumptions about people based on these identity categories because I like to get to know people as individuals, as unique individuals. So that's something that I discuss in my writing and something that I actively engage with when I'm communicating with people.
Thank you. It's unfortunate because we seem to have lost Dom. I know they were out doing an occupation somewhere, and so the connection might have dropped. And so we may well go back around to this if they do manage to come back, because I feel like they have a lot to add to this discussion, especially in terms of veganism in politics. But I want to come back to Ayana on this one as a response.
I just wanted to ask Flowerbomb, how do you describe or define identity politics? Just for my own understanding.
My understanding, I guess my rough definition of identity politics would be the politics in which we view each other in terms of identities. So, like, for example, in terms of identities, people would say that I'm POC, queer, poor, poverty, or whatever. And even though these things are accurate to a degree, they do not summarize my personality. And even though I grew up in poverty, that doesn't mean that I have the same experience with poverty as other people living in poverty. Even within like impoverished neighborhoods like the one I grew up, everybody has a very unique personal relationship to that poverty. So whenever I hear people say, us Black people or us white people or us poor people, we believe in this or we believe in that, I'm very suspicious of that, because it's like, how can you possibly speak for all these different people that have all these very unique, experiences with poverty and with identity? And just in my experience, the more and more people I meet, the more and more I realize that identity politics just does not fully represent the complex nature of people as individuals. So hopefully that wasn't too long-winded. I didn't want to keep it too short because I wanted to make sure that that you got a good definition from me.
No, yeah, that was really helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's all right, I'd like to pose a question to you, Flowerbomb, on the lines of your disownment of identity politics. In terms of the label veganism, do you have the same problem with being branded in as a vegan? Because as we've seen today, and as we continue to see across the many discussions, vegans and non-vegans alike have, that's also a broad term, perhaps not as set at birth as something like gender or sexual identity or race. But do you hold any issues with vegan as an identity? And if yeah, why or why not?
Oh, I'm so happy you brought that up, because that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. When people, before they get to know me, before they get to know like my personal history, as soon as a lot of people that I've met find out that I'm vegan, they immediately think I have money. But like, I basically live on the street. And they assume that I have been whitewashed because they see that I'm POC. They make a lot of assumptions based on that label alone, and that is kind of the nature, that's the habit of what we as society has done, you know. And this isn't related to like liberal politics necessarily, because white supremacy is an identity politic itself. White supremacy, whiteness, like these are all colonial constructs. And that's another reason why I don't believe in fighting authoritarian systems with identity politics, because I don't like using their tools. You know, I like to resist their tools. At the topic at hand, veganism, I identify as a vegan for communication purposes, just to be like, yeah, I'm vegan. Oh man, what's that? Like, I have a huge vegan tattoo on my leg, and it's a good conversation starter. But anybody who's willing to engage in conversation with me about veganism will find out that it's more than just a word. It's more than just a definition. It's more than just a category. Veganism is an expression of rebellion, you know, and it would be great, especially within the anarchist communities or the anarchist scenes or whatever, to where you walk into like an anarchist book fair and everything is vegan by default without having to be labeled vegan, because everybody there is already on board with anti-speciesism as a form of anti-authoritarianism. So therefore, these labels are no longer necessary. But because we still exist within like the society where there's all these differences, sometimes it becomes necessary to communicate that I'm queer or that I'm POC, you know, that I'm vegan or anarchist or so on and so forth. Does that answer your question?
I think it absolutely does. Yeah.
And so along the same sort of vein, an argument that's commonly heard is that veganism is by default racist or ableist. And I just wanted to know if anyone wants to come in with their thoughts on that.
I think that argument also extends to classist as well, in terms of
Absolutely.
the poverty discourse. Yeah, sure, we'll go to Flowerbomb because you were straight in there with your hand.
Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I think that, I don't know. It's complicated. It's very, very complicated, because just as I was talking before about how people are not a monolithic mass that all have the same feelings and have the same experiences, there's a lot of different people that have different access to vegan food. So I think what commonly happens is, I think when veganism gets brought up, people think of like Whole Foods and really bougie capitalist vegan food. So then the natural response to that, especially coming from my personal background, is how the hell can we afford, you know, this really fancy, expensive food? You know what I mean? Like, how are we supposed to be healthy? Like, sure, I care about the animals, but like, how am I supposed to express that when I don't have the money to buy this really fancy vegan food? I think this is where veganism becomes personal, because for me, I've realized that I want to be vegan. I do care about other animals, and I hate the system. It's easier for me to have access to food illegally, also dumpster diving and so on and so forth. Pretty much any barrier that I have come across in being vegan for the past 10 years, I've figured out a way to circumnavigate. And it's not always easy for everybody, but I think that especially if we have the time, you know, I think that it's possible to discover ways of being vegan despite class, despite ability, and so on and so forth. I can really only speak from my personal experience on this because, again, other people might have different experiences that might make it difficult in ways that I'm not familiar with.
Brilliant, thank you. We'll go straight to Ayana as a response on that, and then we'll come to Catherine and Max afterwards, because I appreciate it's been a while.
Yeah, I kind of just wanted to just answer the question. I agree with what you were saying, Flowerbomb, as well. I think that a lot of people, when they think of racist and ableist veganism, they're thinking of well, white veganism, and what is I think is often presented like a capitalist veganism, rather than the veganism that many Black and brown people have, which is not racist and is not ableist, because we have been doing this for ages before the word vegan existed. And obviously, with anything that is dominated by whiteness and white people, there is going to be racism and like oppression involved in it, because it exists everywhere. It's inescapable at this point. But I think that, truthfully, veganism isn't, but it just depends on what sort of variation of it that you're looking at, I guess, and what sort of people are practicing it.
I'm going to come to Max next on this, because without wanting to beat around the bush, I think you've been around animal liberation circles and vegan sort of circles for longer than I'd say most of the other people on the panel. And so in terms of your experience with that, have you seen the sort of ableist or classist or prejudiced sides of veganism? Do you think veganism has to require a certain amount of privilege, and did it back when it wasn't so popularized by whatever forms that may be?
I think that, I mean, I've been homeless at times, I've been on benefits for decades, you know, I've lived on protest camps, whatever. I think there's always a way to eat vegan food, you know, and there's been times I've gone hungry sometimes, every now and again, you know. It's like I've never found any need to deviate and put any animal product in my mouth, to be honest. You know, as for the general kind of the vegan consumer thing that's going on, yeah, I mean, you know, like some of those products are like £5 for a set of burgers or whatever, you know. So there's an element of privilege in that, but it's a capitalist consumer thing, the modern vegan movement. It's an internet-based thing, generally speaking. Of course, it's going to be white privileged people going to be doing that. You know, it's inevitable. That's why the animal liberation side of it, the core, which is about breaking all those oppressive links. You know, animal liberation is, by definition, it has to be anti-fascist and anti-racist. It has to be, and in the practical terms of that, it was very common for the hunt sab ban and half the hunt sabs to go out on anti-NF marches, anti-BNP marches, anti-EDL marches, anti-Orange Men marches, and I've taken part in all of that. I've marched and protested against the Iraq War. And then also within the animal liberation front, the most prominent and well-known activist in the USA is Native American Rod Coronado. In England, it's Keith Mann. You know, and most of the ALF activists I knew had Irish family connections. So, you know, and working class, actually, the ALF is very much a kind of working class set of people generally. And I'd have to say the mainstream animal rights movement before the veganism thing kind of took over, it's generally a middle class white movement. But that was the same for the Iraq War protests. Generally speaking, it was white liberals and middle class people protesting, having their little say, their placard and their banners and their sandwiches for the day and going home on the coaches. That's not liberation. You know, protests within the democratic system can be tolerated forever. You know, protests can go on and on. They love protest. They love protest because it's instant.
Catherine, your thoughts on this, please?
Yeah, so I would say at its core, veganism isn't inherently prejudiced to any group, because the kind of point of veganism is tackling the same sort of issues that people, like, if you think of like feminism and race, it's anti-oppressive, like we've been saying, it's anti-ownership, it's anti-objectification of bodies. So the core issues are trying to deal with the same crux. The problem is the people, like, people are inherently prejudiced, and that's the issue we need to tackle, not veganism as a philosophy. And then I was just going to jump on, I think the other one that's missing is, you know, when as a movements, we've said like racism, classism is also feminism as well, the sexual sexism. So that's the other one that's missing. But yeah, again, I don't think it's inherently at its core. I think it's tackling the same issues. It's the people and the problem, unfortunately.
So, because obviously we heard earlier in terms of your takes around the massive benefits that mainstream veganism and this sort of boost in the popularity of the marketability of veganism can have for the entire thing. How do you think we can start to stomp that out from a mainstream perspective as opposed to a grassroots or activist perspective?
So can you rephrase the question for me?
Sure. So in terms of the argument that veganism has massively benefited from its mass profitability in recent years, do you think that there's any way of using that to tackle the issues that you raised surrounding the people, or do you think that can only be done via the sort of direct action means that other people have mentioned?
So again, it comes back to why people want to be vegan. If we take the environment, because that's like a kind of sometimes less controversial around with people. So, you know, using capitalism and using big business to drive demand for vegan food, try and increase popularity of these vegan foods, more people going vegan, that by default will help people's goal of the planet in terms of the carbon footprint. And so I think there is a point to be made that you can use big business to your advantage, depending on what your goal is. Like if the goal is going to be about different levels of anti-oppression, then maybe capitalism is not the best way to do it. If yours is about your health and you want more kind of vegan options, and you want that every hospital you go to that there to be a vegan option there, or whole food plant-based, if that's your kind of idea, then absolutely get big business to think that veganism will make them money, because broccoli isn't going to make people money. So you have to drive demand to get success on a global scale. Because also, if you're talking about trying to overthrow the kind of structure of the government, you've got the rest of the world to deal with, and with the globalized world, that's incredibly difficult. So if you can make something mainstream really popular and that makes big business money, you're gonna get, again, depending on your goal, you're gonna get that.
So just a quick reminder that the Q&A box is open for any questions that you have for the panelists, so please send those in. We are going to move on to the next question soon, so if you could give like quick fire responses, if that's possible. We'll come to Flower Bomb first.
Oh, Flower Bomb, I think you're muted again.
Thank you, sorry. Yeah, I'll keep this really short. I absolutely agree with Catherine that about veganism at its core. I think that there's definitely people that will use veganism for different ways, whether anti-capitalist or capitalist. And then in addition to what Max was saying, yeah, I have seen fascist vegans, fascists that use veganism, especially a couple examples in Germany that I've seen, where like, I guess a few years ago, there was like a neo-Nazi hipster vegan trend that was happening, and it's basically an attempt for fascists to use veganism as like a way of being like, see, we're not so bad, we care about animals. So personally, whenever I talk with people about veganism, I make it abundantly clear that the veganism that I am engaging with in a day-to-day basis on my own is from an anti-authoritarian or anarchist perspective. So that's all I was going to contribute to that.
Lovely, thank you. We're going to go to Ayana next, please.
Yeah, I just made some notes, so they might be a bit all over the place, but I wanted to make a point that anything that is like resistance-based, like veganism, always starts with the most marginalized communities. It always starts with the working class and sex workers and Black people. So veganism and animal rights, or rather animal liberation, would always be rooted in that, because that's where revolution always comes from. Can't come from the top down. And it's kind of building off what you were just saying, Flower Bomb, about how this idea of veganism can be co-opted, because I think that whiteness finds it very easy to exploit animals, especially because we can't always effectively communicate with them because of like language barriers, and we're not in the same species. So that makes it harder, but it also makes it easier for people to use animals as kind of a badge to say that, oh, I'm a good person, I'm a moral person, which is again the language of colonialism. Yeah, and there's just ways to use animal rights, to use the liberation, or, you know, like earth rights and health rights, because rights is the language of legality and therefore the language of the system. And so we can fight for rights and it still be within the system, but liberation means existing without it, existing without capitalism. So people can say that they're an animal rights person and still be participating in capitalism.
Amazing. I'm really sorry. We're gonna have to move. We're gonna go to Max and then Catherine, and then we have to move on just because of time. Cheers.
Yeah. So what I was going to say was, when you take the step from veganism to being an animal liberationist, that's a whole in case of empowerment. So rather than trying to persuade other people to go vegan, give up animal products, what you're going to do, instead of trying to affect this ridiculous supply, we still don't have any proof that veganism impacts on animal suffering. We don't. So at this point, you know, taking that step to being an animal liberationist and activist in some way, occupying or blockading animal abuse, you are attacking the supply rather than trying to affect this huge demand, this consumer demand. Get rid of the targeted companies, you know, targeted pressure campaigns onto companies attacking the supply. That's the difference between an animal liberationist and a vegan.
Lovely, thanks, Max. And then finally, Catherine, please, and then we're going to have to go to our last two questions. Cheers.
So I thought it'd be really controversial and just ask. So, Flower, you said about that you've met vegan fascists, right? And so I just wonder if somebody is vegan for whatever reason, let's say they're vegan for their health, or they identify as vegan, does it actually matter to their veganism how they politically identify? Because if they're not, they may not be vegan for the same reasons as you are. So if they're vegan, and then kind of is the rest actually relevant? You know, just thought I'm just gonna throw it out there, see what people say.
Cool. We've got about 2 minutes on this, so we'll go to Flower Bomb really quickly, and then Max. We might run over at the end, but yeah, I think it's definitely worth answering. So we'll go Flower Bomb.
Okay, real quick. I think it's about the intention of the individual. I mean, if they're vegan for animals, that's great. That's awesome. They're vegan for the animals. But there's still more to work for if they are aggressive towards other animals, which is human animals. You know, it's ironic to me whenever I hear about fascist vegans, because it means that even though they're vegan for the animals, they still uphold human supremacy to an extent, because they still believe in the oppression of other humans.
Perfectly concise. Thank you so much. And then finally on this, Max, and then we really do need to move on. Cheers.
Right, so yeah, in terms of fascist vegans, I've been involved in loads of different types of groups, from the SABs to animal rights groups to the ALF. And I can tell you, in every single one of those groups, we do not tolerate racists or fascists. I personally kick racists and fascists out of groups. I don't give a whatever their diet is. If they're a racist or fascist, they're not coming anywhere near anything I'm involved in. And the point where, you know, if street violence is needed against Nazis, I am all for that.
Lovely, cool.
Okay, and I so wish Don was still here for this question, because I think they'd have a lot to say about it. But when you hear the argument, there's no ethical consumerism under capitalism being used as maybe a reason why someone doesn't go vegan, what is your response to that? Feel free, anyone, to come in on that.
Sorry, that was Catherine first.
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, I mean, capitalism isn't designed around, you know, ethics. So I think it's entirely a logical argument to make that no, you know, you can't have ethical consumerism under a capitalist system, because that's not what capitalism is. So, you know, the fact that that's not exactly ideal in a capitalist society for someone trying to, but in theory, you know, no, there's not such a thing as that, I would say.
I think we'll go to Ayana next on that point.
You're asking about ethical consumption under capitalism, right? Just checking.
Yes, yeah.
Well, of course, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, but if you're saying that in regards to non-human animals, then you're saying that non-human animals are consumable objects. If you think that animals are consumable, then you would see them as objects. Yeah, that's basically my point.
And with it coming to that being used as a justification or a reason for someone to not go vegan, do you think that makes sense for someone to say, well, it's not possible to be ethical under capitalism, so therefore I'm not going to go vegan?
I don't agree with that at all, obviously. I think that's like saying, it's like saying the world is ableist, so I'm just going to be complicit in ableism. Like, what is that? That's just an excuse, and it's, you know, lazy, and just a cop-out.
Cool. Catherine did have the hand up. It's just been taken down. I don't know if that's Zoom's thing or if
I was saying the same thing, that it's a cop-out.
Cool, perfect. In that case, we'll go to Flowerbomb next on that one.
Actually, what I was going to say was pretty much said by Anna. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I think it's a cop-out. I think it's a cop-out that I hear a lot from self-identified anarchists. And it's always interesting to me, because a lot of times that I hear that argument, it's from these self-proclaimed anarchists that are all about organizing and all about getting in the streets, and, you know, who's the most like anti-police out there. But it's like, but you can't even be vegan. Like, you can't even recognize that, you know, other animals are not food items to consume in the first place. You know, I rarely ever hear a thorough critique of veganism from that perspective. It's normally just a very quick, like, you know, no ethical consumption under capitalism, man. I don't know what to tell you. And that's usually the end of the conversation. So that's all I had to say about that. Everything else I was going to say was said by the last three that talked about it.
No worries. In that case, Max, do you want to come in on this?
Obviously, I totally agree. There can't be any such thing as ethical consumption under capitalism. I mean, that's just insane, isn't it? But what I thought was, there's a perfect little quote from, I'm not gonna read out the full thing. It's a paragraph from by my friend Barry Horn. who he died in hunger strike in prison in 2001 from the effects of a 68-day hunger strike against vivisection, which was worldwide news at the time. And he was a very good friend of mine. And there's a little quote here that I just think kind of sums it all up. Capitalism and animal abuse go hand in hand, and for them there is no profit in life, only death. No fast food to be made from understanding instead of destroying. No financial killing to be made from peace and compassion when money comes from suffering, pain, and war. It would be for some of us to believe, as some do, that because we care and are right, that we will inevitably win one day. There's a bit more, but that kind of sums up, and that's how I feel. You know?
Amazing. Cool. We'll go. How nice it is to have a full unanimous agreement on our topic. Yeah, well, in a debate context.
Common consensus is it's a cop-out.
Cool. We've got one more question, and then we've got a couple of questions for the Q&A, so we might run over a tiny bit. So if anyone,
I think we're doing well for time, actually.
That'll be okay. In that case, yeah, so the last official question before we go to the audience is it's about how we continue this conversation, this narrative, and in certain cases, this activism around non-human animals and around veganism at a time when human injustice is so rife and there's so many human rights issues to be dealt with. And so, yeah, the justifications for focusing on or carrying out those sort of narratives, all the hands have shot up. I think it went Ayana, then Catherine, then Max, and so we'll go in that order, starting with Ayana.
Well, humans are animals. Human animal liberation is intertwined. You can't have one without the other. You can't. It's just intrahuman oppression and violence doesn't, get rid of doesn't, what's the word? Cross out animal oppression. And yeah, I think we continue the conversation by doing what probably everyone here is already doing, hopefully, because it's not one or the other. They're all intertwined, and it doesn't make sense to separate them, because if you're separating them and making them single issues, then it's just going to take too long. You're wasting your energy on something that is so much more complicated and interconnected and webbed.
Lovely, thank you. Catherine, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, there's not a hierarchy of problems in the world to solve. And if we see veganism as trying to do the least amount of harm, then by default, we should be trying to do as much as we can at once. And if, you can deal with two things, or you can try to deal with two things at once. So I think it's, human injustice and will continue to happen, and we need to deal with that, and also animal injustices continue to happen, so we need to deal with that at the same time.
Lovely, thank you. We'll go to Max next.
Every single action I've ever carried out is kind of in my heart has been against the whole system, I guess. It's like you can't separate my anarchism away from my animal liberationism. It's like they're intertwined, and people have been speaking out about animal suffering when pre-capitalist, pre-industrial society, when we didn't have convenience goods or capitalism, like Pythagoras, who else? People throughout history, Buddha, various other people have preached kindness to animals. Kindness. This is the thing. It's like people make veganism so complicated or animal rights so complicated. It's just be nice, isn't it? Be a nice person. Why would you want to harm that creature there? Why would you want to harm that child or that person? Just be a nice person. And I think if you're following that idea of just being nice, you're not going to just be nice to animals and be horrible to people. So that's, it's all interlinked. If there's human suffering, it doesn't mean that animal suffering is less or more or greater than that. It's definitely all part of the same problem. Just be a nice person.
Catherine, do you want to come back in on that?
Sure. I was just going to say also that if there is a big anger against the few human injustices that actually do get any kind of comment. There tends to be some support, and it goes on the media as well. It tends to get more attention again if it's actually picked up, whereas obviously animals tend to continue to be silenced, and so if other people will speak on behalf of lots of humans, whereas if the only people who are speaking for the animals are the vegans, we can't afford to stop. So
cool. I know you don't have your hand, Flower Bomb, but I thought I'd come to you before I raise another question.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much what everybody said, I agree with wholeheartedly. It's really nice hearing everybody, speak on this, because it's really great, and I absolutely agree. I don't really know if I have anything else to add. I mean, everybody else summarized it really well. I guess the only thing I would say is that it is a tragedy that anytime non-human animals are brought up into the conversation, there's always a few people that treat it as if it's a distraction when it's all part of the same thing. And that's why whenever I talk about veganism, I always talk about, anti-authoritarianism as well, because it's all part of the same thing. I think that people like all of us on this panel, I think that it's really good that we continue talking and engaging and dialogue about these topics, because I feel like society in general, if you look at the mainstream media and how it treats things related to animal cruelty, I think it still silences it, because there's a huge industry that profits off of, the slaughter of, these other animals. And I think we're going to continue to see that. Like, how many direct actions have been taken against McDonald's establishments, all the hunting towers that have been destroyed, in different states across the United States, and you never hear it gain the type of media attention anything else does. And I think that's why it's important for us to continue these conversations and dialogue, and also just circulating news any way that we can,
Max, would you like to come in on that?
But animal liberation is a war, basically. This is a battle. So and we're at the early stages of it. This is the other thing. So we're not going to have the media on our side, and the police are going to be against us, the government's against us. And over the decades of history that I've witnessed or been part of some of it, I can give you loads of examples of how the media and the governments and police and the prison system have all been used against us. So we have to accept animal liberation is a war, and as part of that, the self-sacrifices we need to make to see progress. We are going to be against these huge, powerful companies and interests, basically. But we need to be ready for that. It's not just not going to be blowing over these industries through buying vegan burgers.
You're the third person, interestingly, to mention the role that mainstream media has effect in I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth here, but in diminishing the struggle of animals under such a omnivorous or carnivorous society. I just want to sort of zone in on that and see what the panel thinks the solutions or the answers are with regards to the media's part in how Max described it as the war on.
Can I also jump in there with, I think, Max, with your Animal Liberation TV, do you see that as a sort of creating an alternative media? Is that how you view the work you're doing?
Well, definitely one example highlights that specifically, and that is about my mate Barry, who died in prison on hunger strike against animal experiments. he was, oh my God, I mean, during that 68-day hunger strike, they ignored it, and then they just threw everything they could to make him look as terrible as possible. And when the hunger strike ended after 68 days, the media basically, along with the government, lied and said the whole thing had basically been a hoax. So that's one of many examples of the media completely lying about us, whatever, or tarnishing us as extremists and God knows what else. And so, yeah, Animal Liberation TV is me getting a chance to say, actually, this is the truth, what went down. You know, what can you do? You can only do your best and try and get a message out there. You can do what you can. Up against mainstream media, you're up against a big obstacle, but you don't really want probably the people that read the Sun newspaper. You're not really looking at them as part of any sort of productive struggle. So you can kind of ignore the mainstream media to some extent, their effect.
Well, thank you. Catherine, you were the first person to raise the issue of media. Do you agree with Max in the mainstream media is an obstacle in the way of the vegan movement?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about, I suppose it's trying to distinguish between, you know, big conglomerates of mass media, you know, the major newspapers and the big TVs, and then maybe about being able to use the, like, social media is obviously a really promising platform. It's got a lot, it's a lot to say for why veganism has grown so substantially. So I think, if, you know, those forms, social media as a platform for media, it has got phenomenal potential. You know, I always really struggle to find out when these events are. I'm not really that great on social media, but lots of people seem to be able to go to all these events because I think they're more on social media than I am. But yeah, I think that it has a place, but the bigger companies which are so involved in big business are always going to shy away because they have so much to lose financially. They will not be show, and also people really won't read it, and it's all about what's selling. And if you show the truth on even, you know, the back page of the newspaper, people aren't going to buy it. It's not going to work. So
Flowerbomb, the truth about veganism and mainstream media. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I pretty much wholeheartedly agree with Catherine. You know, same thing with Max. I think, you know, the thing is, I have mixed feelings. On one hand, I don't really like social media a lot because I feel like social media has a tendency to create a little too much disconnection with people. People don't interact with each other face to face as a result of like a lot of like phone and hand time. And that's kind of a different topic for another day. But on the other hand, because the mainstream media has a tendency to silence, especially so many struggles, so many actions related to animal liberation, I do find it very important to use social media in the form of, like, you know, podcasts or like, you know, the project that Max is talking about. Also, one of the biggest reasons that I run a zine distro is because I want this information to be accessible. And I know that mainstream bookstores or mainstream media is not going to, you know, allow that kind of content out. So I honestly think the best tool we have is as much in-face direct communication about these things, as well as whatever other tool works, I guess. You know, honestly, it's a war. You know, I guess we got to use everything that we can, and, you know, it's not going to be as easy as we want it to be, but this is what it is. This is what we've got. We got to work with what we've got, you know.
Sure. Ayana, we're going to go to you, and then we're going to take some of the questions from the Q&A that have been pouring in throughout the course of the event.
Yeah, I made some notes again. I wanted to say that you obviously can't rely on media. I feel like there's a lot of media reliance sometimes as a form of like resistance or whatever. And I think we can get kind of passive in that. But I do think the media definitely has value, especially like nowadays with the pandemic. It's helpful for communication, and it's kind of ties back into what Flarbon was saying about identity politics, about how these identity labels are kind of good for communication. They're good for kind of having, you know, a community, whatever, to identify with and understand each other. But when I say media, I'm mainly talking about like social media, for example. It's not going to be the be all end all be all, whatever it is at all. It's not going to be what creates what you want, but we could definitely use it, I think. That makes any sense.
Cool. Right, that was the end of the written questions, and so we're now going to go on to the Q&A and have some open questions for the panel as submitted throughout the course of these things.
So we've got a question that was submitted anonymously, and it was, for those who can't risk imprisonment or homelessness due to physical or mental issues or caring responsibilities, all those sorts of things, how can they engage with activism? And do you think that makes them lesser of an activist if they cannot engage in those methods? Ayana, you were the first there.
Yeah, well, like as a minor in society, it's not safe for me to be participating in all of the things that I want to be participating in right now, because other people in my life would legally be responsible for me and for my actions. And I can't make those decisions for other people because I feel like it's disregarding everybody else's autonomy. But I think there are so many different roles that that exist in activism and in action and in change. And so much of it is really just kind of setting the ground for the more perhaps violent stuff that will happen later on, because we're not going to see that much in our lifetime, I'm sure. And so much of revolution or writing also depends on the people who are taking care of the kids, who are cooking the meals, who are clothing people, who are providing first aid. Not all of it needs to be things that necessarily get you in trouble. I can't remember who was saying it before, but they were saying that talking about different, I think it was Flarbon, was talking about different kinds of activism, like leafleting, holding banners and signs. And although, I don't know, maybe they're not like, I can't find the words for it, but there's so many different kinds of activism that you can take part in that don't necessarily put you or the people that you're caring for in danger. And you shouldn't ever be made to feel like you're less of an activist by doing things that are accessible to you. And yes, we have to take risks when it comes to liberating ourselves, but we also have to find ways to survive. And it's not fair to put those expectations on everyone, because not everyone can afford to take those risks.
And personally for you, Ayana, part of your activism is through art with the Anti-Speciest Arts Collective. So do you find art to be a powerful tool?
Yeah, I think art is in so many things. I think that art is natural. All sorts of animals participate in art forms. I think maybe even resistance is an art form. We're creating, that's what art is. And radical art is creating to change things, is creating to revolutionize things. And art plays a part in taking care of ourselves, because I think that self-care and recognizing community care and mental health is immensely important, because we need to find ways to survive right now until revolution, as Huey P. Newton said. I'm paraphrasing, but yeah. And so, yeah, I think one of my goals with the Anti-Speciest Arts Collective was to promote that, was to share that idea of self-care and art as important tools of communication, of expression, of personal and community growth, because there is so much that we can create, and capitalism forces us to monetize everything that we create, monetize ourselves, and leaves us with no time for art, no time for peace, no time for rest. And I think those things are essential to surviving so that we can create the art of revolution.
Cool. Thank you for that. We're going to go to Max and then Flowerbomb, and then I think we're going to have to move on to our next question.
Yeah, so I think it's not a question of what you do as such. I think it's just trying to do more. You know, what I've been sort of saying on my channel earlier on in the year is like, let's make 2021 a year where we all say to ourselves, we're going to redouble our efforts. So whatever that is, you know, it might be joining a Hunt Club group, it might be joining a campaign, it might be setting up a campaign, it might be fundraising, it might be donating money to a campaign. But just try and do more, you know, because nothing is going to change without putting more effort in. And we do need people who are willing to go to prison and be arrested and whatever else. We need floods of people like that if we're going to instigate change. We do. And so self-sacrifice, depending on your own abilities, has to be paramount whatever we do in the struggle for animal liberation. It's that the idea that we're going to sacrifice some of our own comfort and our own time or whatever for the long-term goal, which is ending all these atrocities going on now, basically.
Lovely, thanks. We're going to go to Flowerbomb, and then I think we have to move on, if that's okay with everyone.
Yeah, really quick, I just wanted to say that I agree with both people who just spoke. I really like the idea of art being used as a form of rebellion, because if we think about what art is that part of us as unique individuals that the government, that these colonial establishments can't take away from us, you know. And you see this the most with people who have been incarcerated, who have been like locked up. And you see that even within like these strict confines, they're still able to create anarchy within themselves and create an art expression that that people just can't touch. And I think that's absolutely beautiful. And I really like, you know, everything that Ayana was saying about like expression and art and other forms of rebellion that don't necessarily have to be risky. I especially like the idea of like, you know, zines and communication, because again, like we were talking about before, unfortunately, dialogue is heavily suppressed about, you know, animal liberation. I also think that prisoner support is incredibly powerful, you know, for the people that are willing to take those risks, that have the abilities to take those risks. I think that it's absolutely important to support them while they're locked up, you know. So that was pretty much my contributions. Yeah, whatever makes people feel comfortable, you know. Everybody's unique and everybody has a unique set of personal tools that they can contribute to this war, you know.
So unfortunately, because we want to get as many questions as we can, I'm sorry, Max, if we go on to the next question, is that all right? Just to get around as many as possible. So this one, Catherine already answered in the chat, but I think it's important and it would be good for everyone to hear. So we had a question from Meeks, which says, Catherine, as a Tory, how do you justify the capitalist oppression of human and non-human animals? So if you'd like to share your response.
So no holding back. We're just gonna go straight there.
Absolutely.
Well, so I did answer the way I answered the thing. The first one was about the non-human oppression. That's why I'm a vegan. So to me, that's how I justify the non-human oppression. And then the part about the oppression of humans, I don't think it's fair to link that to Toryism or capitalism in isolation, because, like, you know, if you think the alternative socialism and communism, their attempts of that have caused equal levels of oppression, of human oppression, and when they've been tried in Western Europe and in other aspects of the world. So I don't think they don't create the utopian world that they claim to of equality. So I don't think it's fair to say that because I'm a Tory, I therefore am justified. I don't. I think they're separate. Also, in the UK, the Tory party is very centred. So again, I don't think it's fair to imply that Toryism is extreme. None of our political parties are extreme. And then the third one I said is about the just about, you know, veganism is supposed to be about kindness. You know, we've said about how would you just be a nice person. Then I think if someone is vegan and they want people to respect their views, then we should do people the same courtesy, and for whatever reason they are vegan, we need to respect and tolerate their views as well. So I would just say that even if they don't align with your personal view, we need to accept that, and we can't necessarily, yeah, that's how I answered it.
Do we have any responses wanting to come in on that? I'm so surprised.
I'm pleased.
oh, that's what you've seen. Ayana,
put your hands down. Put your hands down.
Well, first of all, you said that Tory is like centred. Did you say
So in the UK, the Tory party is centre right. How they identify as centre right.
I don't understand how. I'm just trying to understand you. Like, how does being right wing work with veganism?
Because again, we need to associate that there's extremities on both sides of the political sphere. You know, it's a spectrum, or it's a sphere. Actually, it does a whole loop. So I don't think people are vegan for a variety of reasons, and so I don't necessarily think it needs to align with your political ideology. But if it did, I would argue that the Conservative Party at its core is about conservation, and it's also about change. And people don't necessarily, I think people have a misunderstanding sometimes about the Conservative Party, and there is an unfair assumption that to be vegan you need to be either a socialist or at least not right wing. And again, it really depends on why you're vegan. If you're vegan for your health, it really doesn't matter what your political ideology is. I'm not vegan for just my health, but I don't necessarily. And again, it keeps coming back to the UK's political structure doesn't necessarily, there isn't a political party, or there isn't a vegan UK party. If there was, I don't think it would do very well because of the way our structure works. So it's just about, we have one kind of democratic voice, and given that voting turnout isn't that high anyway, I would rather use it to the party that most aligns with my views, even if that's not always my veganism.
But my point here is that my thought is that veganism is not apolitical, and it is for liberation, and you can't have liberation with right-wing politics, because right-wing politics is about repression and oppression. And also, I understand your point about voting, but I feel like voting is working within the system. I don't believe that we're going to get liberation through voting. So yeah, there's no vegan party, but why are you relying on the government when the government are allowing the oppression of animals? And the government that you support, the party that you support, also create laws which oppress humans. If you promote kindness and all of this stuff, I don't see how those things can.
So your first comment about that veganism is I've now forgotten it. The veganism is about anti-oppression.
Veganism is not apolitical. It's about being anti-oppression.
Again, that's your relationship with veganism. That's not mine. I do see it. I don't think you can use politics to implement change. You don't necessarily need to align your veganism with politics. If your goal is animal liberation, I understand why that may seem that you have to reject the entirety of the system. I disagree. I think you can use the current system to implement change. And so I think that I would rather vote and use the vote than kind of reject it in entirety, because I don't reject it in entirety. And I think that's where we're probably never going to agree. So it's just kind of I do see vegan, it doesn't have to link to your political belief.
Brilliant. We're going to take Flower Bomb's point. If necessary, we'll give you a chance to respond, Catherine, and then we do have to move on because we've got a couple of questions left on the Q&A that we really want to get through. Cool, Flower Bomb.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I feel like this debate here is something that could probably be, you know, a whole different topic, whole different situation altogether. I just wanted to point out a couple things. Whenever I think about veganism, if the logical conclusion of veganism is animal liberation, in my opinion, it's very difficult to have genuine animal liberation if you have governance, these colonial establishments that literally convert land in which, you know, on which animals live and exist on, converting that land into ultimately human supremacist landscapes. I think it's very important for people to think about these things, because even though some people feel that maybe it's impossible to overthrow the system, if we genuinely want animal liberation, if that is the reason why we are vegan, because we believe in equality with non-human animals, I think it's very important to understand that as long as we have civilization, industrial society, countries, borders, governments, we are always going to have human supremacy, because I'm sitting next to a highway right now, and the amount of dead bodies along this stretch of highway is a direct result of something being built. Like, speciesism is built into the infrastructure of our world. Our world is increasingly encroaching on non-human animal lives. And that is the reason why my veganism is also anti-authoritarian. I just wanted to point that out.
Cool, Catherine, if you want, there's time for you to really quickly respond to that. If not, we'll go on to the last question. It's completely up to you.
It'll be more of a repeat of what I was just previously saying, so I'm happy to go on to the next question.
Okay, sure.
So I'm very aware that we're running over, but there's one last question that I'd like to get to before we wrap up. And so Elle had a discussion point in the Q&A section, which was that they realized maybe a trend of Indigenous people that have really loving relationships with animals, but then also eat them. And I wanted to ask, maybe if the argument of it being a cultural norm for someone to eat meat, whether that justifies doing so.
We'll go to Max first, and then Anna.
Well, my answer kind of links into all the previous answers, which is it's not necessarily animal abuse in itself that we're looking to stamp out, because that's going to be impossible, like stamping out any abuse. It's the industrialization of that abuse that's going on. You know, it's the large scale stuff, it's the huge companies. We can't alter every single human's behavior. It's the industrialization we need to wipe out. And I just wanted to add a quick point as well, which is I've never seen any change come through government regarding animals. The hunting bill's a load of crap, as we all know. And the only successes I've seen have been through grassroots organising. I just wanted to make that point.
I think it was Ayana and then Flower Bomb, and then we'll go to Catherine if she wants, and then we'll have to wrap up.
Yeah, I just agree with what you just said, Max. And I mean, I'm not Indigenous, so I can't speak to this really. And Indigenous means many different things because there are Indigenous people all over the world. But I think that decolonization is about moving forward rather than moving backwards. And I'd love to know other people's opinions on this, but I don't see why people can't change or grow to be better. Yes, we're like definitely trying to get rid of the industrialization because that is what is ruining the world. But I think that even within our cultures and even within our, you know, traditions, they can still evolve and they can still grow, and we can still become more aware of that, I think, if that makes sense.
Lovely. Flower Bomb, will come to you.
Yeah, Ayana actually summed up what I was going to say very eloquently. Very much agree with that. I guess the only thing I would add is that it seems, at least in my experience, especially within the anarchist scene communities, different people, that the indigenous perspective is always brought up as like a catch-all. You know, there's the assumption based on identity politics that you can't ever criticize indigenous people because of, you know, the awful things that have happened to them. And my two responses to that is, you know, like Ayana said, we're not moving backwards, we're moving forward. And moving forward means that we're understanding and recognizing these different kind of relationships that we've had with other animals for years. And we're trying to change that. We're trying to recognize how domination and control have ultimately created the prison that we're currently living in. The second thing I want to say is that indigenous people are not a monolith. Again, another problem with identity politics is that when you say, a lot of people try to speak for indigenous people, but as a matter of fact, I've met quite a few indigenous vegan anarchists that not only reject their old customs and cultures and stuff due to their, you know, discovered understanding of veganism and anti-oppression and anti-authority, but there's also a lot of indigenous histories related to vegetarian, you know, and I think it's important for people to remember that even if we want to talk about, you know, whether indigenous people are vegan or vegetarian, we have to remember that heavy meat, flesh secretion, animal-based diets were a European thing that was brought over across the world, you know. So anti-vegan people have a tendency to try to rewrite history to fit their narrative and use identity politics as a way of avoiding criticism. And I think it's important for, you know, that to not be a deterrent, you know, for understanding these things.
Fabulous. Thank you, Flowerbomb. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for in the way of questions. There were loads more questions that have been submitted, so if we didn't get around to it, sorry. I feel like this whole conversation could have gone on far longer than it has, and we could be into tomorrow. But yeah, this has been the last event for the Festival of Debate in 2021, so it's an absolute privilege. We've just got time to go around the group once more for any closing statements, and then we'll leave you to get on with your day. We'll go in order of my screen, bottom to top. We'll go Catherine first, please.
Sorry, I actually, what did you say?
Just closing statements for the end of the session.
I would say that I think it's good that we have some different opinions on this, even though I think I was mostly the different one, because I think, you know, we're still, as a vegan community, we are still quite a fringe. So I do think it's important that we try and you know, appeal to as wide a demographic as we possibly can, and we don't want to exclude anyone because of, you know, their other opinions in any capacity. So I think it's good that we're having this chat. I think it needs to continue to be said, and I think that fundamentally, whatever reason you are vegan and whatever reason you, or to ever what extent you can be vegan, is great.
Lovely, thank you so much. We got Ayana next.
I just wanted to say thank you for this opportunity to talk. It was really nice to speak with you and meet with you. So thanks. Yeah, bye.
Amazing, thank you. Max?
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you very much as well for giving me the opportunity. It's been really nice hearing other people who share similar sentiments, you know, because ultimately we can talk about this stuff, but what we really are sharing is a heartbreak of what's going on, a deep frustration and heartbreak at how sinister this speciesism is when it's practiced in these slaughterhouses and labs. And it, for me, I do get a real sort of joy from hearing other people who are concerned about these issues and who want to fight. So I say fight harder, and watch my channel on YouTube, Animal Liberation TV. Thank you.
Amazing. I'm so glad you got to get the plug in. We'll go to Flowerbomb finally for a closing statement.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for, you know, letting me be a part of this. I thought this was a wonderful discussion. It was really exciting to hear all these different perspectives. It's always an exciting thing for me to hear different perspectives, because that's how I got to where I am, is just like recognizing that everybody is different and everybody comes from different backgrounds, and that helps shape my own understanding of the world around me. Yeah, that's pretty much it. It was awesome. It was fun. Thank you so much.
So that just leaves us to say thank you so much to the panelists, and thanks to Dom, who unfortunately we lost about halfway through. Thanks to the tech support from Johnny and Natalie, and I think Johnny's gonna come and just round it off for us.
Thank you so much, and to all of our panelists, as has been said, absolutely fantastic and fascinating event. Thank you all for your contributions. Excellent hosting today for Tallulah and Isaac. It's been brilliant. Thank you for your support, Nat. As has been mentioned, this is the last session of the 2021 festival, which started at the beginning of May. So if you go to festivaldebate.com, you can see the last 5 weeks worth of brilliant events on the Watch Again section on the website, and all of our social media. If you're in a position to do so, you'll also find links to donate and support the Festival of Debate so we can continue doing this. And of course, a massive thank you goes to our audience today for joining us on this sunny afternoon if you're in the UK, and throughout the festival. Obviously, without all of you, then there would be less point to doing this. So thank you for giving up your time and engaging in the debate, both on the webinars, with the panelists and online. It's fantastic to have you all here. We'll catch you online soon, and hopefully in person for the 2022 Festival of Debate. But for 2021, that is indeed a wrap.